Hi, I'm Elspeth. I'm a literacy teacher and I'm the co-author of the Meg and Greg book series. They're decodable stories for new readers. This is an introduction to structured literacy. Structured literacy is an approach to teaching reading and spelling. I'm going to explain 4 elements or areas to focus on to get you started and 3 guiding principles for how to teach them. But first, what is structured literacy and why is it getting so much attention at the moment? Structured literacy is a term that was coined and trademarked by the International Dyslexia Association. It refers to reading instruction and programs that are informed by and delivered consistently with the science of reading research at their foundation. The science of reading research refers to empirical studies that have been carried out to determine exactly how students learn to read successfully. Now, the fact that the term structured literacy was coined by the International Dyslexia Association doesn't mean that it's an approach only for students with dyslexia. It's been proven to be successful with all kinds of beginning readers. So, with the lens of universal design for learning, it makes sense to me to teach all students with a structured literacy approach. Here are the 4 elements I will introduce you to in this video. 1. Phonological awareness. 2. Sound symbol connections, or also known as phonics. 3. Syllables. And 4. Morphology. And then the guiding principles for how those elements can be taught. Your teaching should be systematic and cumulative. It should be explicit and diagnostic. Phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate sounds within words. It's an oral skill, and it starts at the most basic level with the ability to identify separate words within a sentence. Then you would move on to identifying syllables within a word, and eventually each sound or phoneme within a word. At its most advanced level, phonological awareness is the ability to manipulate, which means add, remove, or switch sounds within words. Evidence shows that phonological awareness is critical for learning to read. It's something that you should add into your daily routine in the classroom. It only needs to take 5 minutes, and it can be lots of fun. There's lots of opportunities for student participation, so it's a really enjoyable time of the day. You could fit it right in there after calendar. But do some research on phonological awareness and make sure your teaching isn't random or lacking focus. Choose a logical scope and sequence and take your students through it day by day. Next is phonics and other spelling concepts. Phonics is teaching of the sound symbol connections or associations in our language. That is the relationship between sounds and the letters that represent them. Now, it's not as straightforward as just teaching that every letter makes a single sound, as it does in some languages. English is a bit more complex. We have 26 letters in our alphabet, but 44 different sounds in our language, approximately. That means that we have a fair number of letters that have to work in combination with other letters to represent sounds. Take, for example, the letters S and H. When they're together, they make the sound sh. We also have a number of letters that represent more than one sound. Look at all the vowels, for example. They all make both a short sound and a long sound. Now, phonics isn't just about teaching the letters and the sounds that they represent. Because we have more than one way to spell some sounds in English, it's also important to teach what the most likely spelling for a sound would be within a word. Let's use the sound oi, for example. There are 2 ways to represent oi in our spelling system, oi and oy. Oi is the most likely to fall in the middle of a syllable, like in the word boil, whereas oy is the most likely choice if the oi sound comes at the end of the syllable, in a word like boy. Now, as mentioned in phonological awareness, when teaching phonics, choose a logical order or a scope and sequence and follow it. Make sure that it starts with the most basic concepts and works toward the more complex. Next is morphology. Morphology is the study of how words are constructed and their relationship to other words in our language. In early primary, it might include teaching of inflectional suffixes that are used to make a variant on a word. Like the word play becomes plays when you add an S, playing when you add an ing, or played when you add an ed. In older grades, morphology might include learning the meanings of prefixes, roots, and suffixes that would help a student build vocabulary and explain why some words aren't spelled exactly how you would expect. Also part of morphology would be teaching common rules for adding suffixes. For example, when you spell the word sad-er, you double the D, but when you spell the word sadly, you don't. It's important to teach students exactly when you do this and when you don't. Another common one is when to drop the E when adding a suffix to a word ending in a silent E. As we've said with all elements of structured literacy, for morphology, you need to choose a logical scope and sequence, which starts at the most basic skills and leads toward the more complex, and follow it with your students. The fourth element I want to introduce to you as part of a structured literacy approach is syllables. A syllable is either a whole word or part of a word that has one vowel phoneme or one vowel sound in it. Generally, there's considered to be 6 different syllable types, and you can teach them as you progress through your phonics scope and sequence. A syllable indicates how the vowel is going to be pronounced. So, if a student is able to identify what syllable types there are in multisyllabic words, then they should be able to read or spell that word much more efficiently. That completes our 4 elements of a structured literacy approach: phonological awareness, sound symbols connections, which we also refer to as phonics, syllables, and morphology. Now I would like to talk about the guiding principles for how to teach these elements. We'll go through systematic and cumulative, explicit, and diagnostic. Systematic means that the organization of material follows a logical order of the language. The sequence should begin with the easiest, most basic concepts and elements and progress methodically toward the more difficult concepts and elements. This is something we've mentioned at every step of the way with each of the elements of a structured literacy approach. Cumulative means that each step is based on concepts that have been previously learned. Don't jump ahead. Using CH, for example, the 4 words I have on the screen all start with the sound ch. If my teaching is cumulative, then I would only expect my students to be able to read or spell words that contain concepts they have already been taught. The words cheese and chain both contain vowel teams. If those have not been taught to your students, then you should not use those 2 words in any reading or spelling activity. You could use them in an oral activity, like identifying if students can hear the sound, but not in a reading or spelling activity. You should stick only to words that use concepts your students already know. The words chip and chest would be better options because they contain concepts that would likely to be taught before teaching CH. The second guiding principle is explicit instruction, which is the deliberate teaching of all concepts with continuous student-teacher interaction. The opposite of explicit teaching would be incidental teaching, where the student would have responsibility for inferring letter-sound relationships or other concepts from words they encounter. Going back to our example of OI versus OY, with incidental teaching, the student would be left to figure out on their own that OI is the likely spelling in the middle, whereas OY is the likely spelling at the end of a syllable. With explicit instruction, the teacher teaches this concept explicitly. In explicit teaching, it's not assumed that students will naturally deduce concepts on their own. And finally, diagnostic teaching. This is instruction that's based on careful and continuous assessment. Assessment could be informal, as in observation, or formal, using standardized measures or assessments. Universal screening can also help us flag areas that many students may be deficient in, and then you can add that to your whole class instruction. Or with screening, you may find that only a few students are deficient on a concept, and those students can be targeted in small group intervention. Another benefit of constant diagnostic teaching is that it helps us to monitor progress. So there you have it. 4 elements to include in a structured literacy approach and 3 guiding principles for how to teach them. Check out the description below for a list of resources to get you started on a structured literacy approach to teaching reading and spelling with your students.